It's the community. It's the experience. It's being in that space. It's the development.
Okay, it starts before that. So by the time we get to the end of high school, what we're seeing is 19 years of trajectory. We get to pre-K and kindergarten, and those early teachers start labeling little Johnny as more threatening, misbehaving, or whatever.
You're not supposed to stop. You just keep going and you keep going. And as a Black woman, that's been both detrimental and helpful. You have a goal, you have something that you're pushing for, you don't stop.
That's something that the Black community has to start paying attention to. Infrastructuring things that allow us to be meaning-making individuals in the marketplace.
My mom was educated, but she was also only one voice. She was only one voice.
It's not the will of God for us to live paycheck to paycheck. It's not the will of God for us to work 3 and 4 jobs. Then when do we put in time for him and his ministry?
My mom was educated, but she was also only one voice. She was only one voice.
It's not the will of God for us to live paycheck to paycheck. It's not the will of God for us.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to The Great Divide. I am your host, Dr. Jali Barnes, and I'm so excited to be here with my friends who I'm going to introduce in a very short amount of time. Just for a little bit of background, this is the discussion where we talk about intra-community issues within the Black community and communities of color. We're talking about achievement gaps, education gaps, discipline, community, faith, family, all of these things that impact how we grow together. And the goal is to always find a solution to close these gaps so that we can move forward as one unit. So I'm super excited to introduce my friends. First up, we're going to hear from Dr. Donald Garner. He's going to tell us a little bit about himself, and then we're going to keep going.
What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. Donald Garner. I am a recent graduate of Fordham's Graduate School of Social Work. I obtained my PhD in August of 2020, and my research looks at the lives of formerly incarcerated men or returning citizens. And I do a lot of work around family reunification and how they are, reacclimating themselves and renegotiating family ties, once they come home. I have an extensive education background. I worked for the Florida Department of Education as an assistant director of dropout prevention. And then when I moved to New York City, I also, in addition to my coursework at school, I served as a teacher recruitment manager for the New York City Department of Education. And so I am really, really excited to have this conversation with the rest of my colleagues this afternoon. Thanks for having me again, Dr. Barnes.
Thanks again. There we go. Thank you again, Dr. Garner. And I'm not going to be calling you that the whole time. You're going to be Donald for this conversation. But thank you again. Now we're going to hear from my really good friend, Mrs. Denise Césaire, who is doing some phenomenal things. One of the things she's going to talk about is her Kids Bee Boxes, which is all about social emotional learning and educational enhancement while at home. Denise, what's going on? Uh-oh, you're muted, sis.
Dang, I got caught saying with that. But hi, it's really great to be here. Like you said, my name is Denise Césaire. I am a mom, a wife, an educator, and I really just appreciate spaces like this because I feel like I get to bring my whole self. I've had the opportunity to study education. I had the opportunity to study administration and policy. I had the opportunity to teach around the world, to be in other spaces across the nation, just understanding how people implement systems and structures. My 9-to-5 job, I work for the New York City Department of Education on the college and career planning team, and directly working in policy and implementation. And so it's really exciting to be in this space. And yes, I do have a company called Kids Be Boxes. My husband and I are really passionate just about giving children the space to just be anything that they want to be, and to remove the barriers that that often get in the way of that. And it really isn't as complicated as we make it seem. And so every toy, every activity that we curate in boxes aims to do just that, to give children the opportunity to be and to put a smile on their faces. So yes.
Thank you so much, Denise. And next we're going to hear from my really, really good friend, Mr. Frederick Fernandez. Uh-oh, that's not him. Hold on. Where you at? Hey, friend.
Hey. Hello.
What's going on? Tell the people about yourself.
All right. So my name is Frederick Fernandez by trade, and I am a school counselor in the Department of Education in New York City. I've actually had wide range of different avenues working with youth. At one point, I was with the Brooklyn Life program for Good Shepherds program, working with court-involved youth. I've been an assistant dean at Boys and Girls High School. So I've gotten to see different sections and different areas of, policies being implemented both in the school and outside of school. So, and both of them have hand in hand on how it affects a lot of our youth today. So I'm really looking forward today to really discussing and really talking about, what our children are actually facing.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and bring everybody back in the room. Welcome. I'm so happy once again just to have all of you guys with me. And we do have one more guest who is coming. He is on his way. And once he gets here, we'll take a pause for the cause and introduce him. But let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we want to talk about are these educational gaps. So just for a little bit of background about how this conversation series started, it actually started off of a meme. I saw something on the internet and somebody posted a meme saying that Black women get bored and decide to go and get a doctorate degree. And depending on how you read it, it could be funny or it could be a little offensive. So I took it as more of like a joke, like, we just make it seem easy, right? But a friend of mine read the same meme and she took it as it kind of minimizes the purpose of going to school and completing a doctoral program, and what's kind of the attitude behind that. And then she also recently received her doctorate degree. So these are two, newly hooded, doctors having a conversation about the significance of completing a program. And so it started to become a conversation about what are some of the differences that we're seeing in terms of achievement, in terms of attitudes. There were a bunch of articles that came out talking about how Black women are rising to be one of the most educated ethnic group, communities in the United States. And so, me being me, I went and I looked up the numbers, and the trajectory is like this. It's like Black women are going up and up and up, and Black men are kind of going like this. They're either at a plateau or they're even going down a little bit. So I went ahead and researched the history of that. And it turns out that this is actually going back to like the 70s. This isn't a new thing. The reason it's getting so much attention is that the gap actually started to close. So we went from like 1975, where Black women were kind of on that upward trajectory. Black men started to go down, and we know a lot of things happened around that time. You got, the end of the civil rights era, you got the Vietnam War, then you had the epidemics and, the crack and cocaine and war on drugs and all that kind of stuff that got into, our communities and affected us. But somewhere around the 2000s, you started to see that gap kind of closing. And that's where most of us come into the story, right? So we graduated high school and college in like the early to mid 2000s. And then somewhere around 2015, we see that gap starting to widen again. And so you're starting to see that conversation rise up. Before we jump into it, we do have our final guest here. And I'm going to add him in real quick. Quincy, what's up, friend? I'm gonna go ahead and let everybody else hop out real quick, and I'm gonna give you an opportunity to just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, and then we're gonna jump right back in where we left off. Everybody good with that? All right, cool.
Hey. I guess I'm speaking now, right? My name is Quincy Merrill. I originally from Brooklyn, New York. I'm an educator. Totally right now. I am a history teacher for the 8th grade. And I am also a candidate for Fisher Fellows to get my certification in leadership and other things so I can be a principal in the schools as well. I did my undergrad degree at Morehouse College. I did my master's degree at New York University, NYU. I've been doing a lot of other projects around education. I'm a 2-time published author. I'm just trying to think off the top of the head because I did so many other things. Fisher Fellows, I said that already, and doing curriculum development for KIPP NYC as far as the social studies and history department to implicate some more, the development as far as I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I've been talking about so many different things. When it comes to the demographic of students that we actually teach. So just kind of building the curriculum as far as, the demographic of around the students that we teach so that it's more personable and demographically sound to the students that we teach. And I'll just stop there because I feel like I'm late. So
That's awesome.
Yeah, so many other things. I know I'm late, so I'm just like, I don't want to do too much.
No, it's awesome. We're definitely happy that you're here. I'm going to go ahead and bring everybody back in the room. So I don't know how much of my little spiel you heard, but basically we want to talk about why we think these gaps exist. So before we even get into some of the questions and the articles that we read, does anybody want to just jump in about what your observations have been about the existence of these gaps and what you perceive the contributing factors to be?
I'll start. So, and definitely I'm going to not share everything that's in my head because I have my esteemed colleagues here. So I'll speak predominantly from the perspective of an academician that has been working with schools, observing, a lot of behavior and trends, while being in Florida immediately after graduating from Florida State University. So as I said before, I worked as soon as I finished undergrad as the assistant director of the dropout prevention program for the Florida Department of Education. In that capacity, I traveled across the state of Florida, mostly working with our schools that were rated either a D or an F school. And that was actually the first time that I was exposed to, this phenomena of seeing, young men of color warehoused, and suspension programs being expelled once I was looking at data. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing in terms of, what you talked about, Dr. Barnes, where there's a surge and an upward mobility of women of color, Black women in particular, graduating at higher levels compared to, Black men. I would say it starts at what is happening in the K-12 space, right? And we know all the data and the research around, what has been said about 3rd and 4th grade when Black boys are being perceived by their teachers and how they're being funneled or tracked, if you will. So I would say, in summary, the policies that have been in place since the beginning of time, specifically in our K-12 schools, is one of the main reasons why we're seeing young men of color not even make it to college in the first place. And so I will stop there. And again, I would just weigh in and contribute to the conversation by saying, from a policy lens and a practice lens, at what happens in K-12, it is not favorable for Black boys on average.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I know I'm late, so I'll just jump in so I can have my pieces included. I do. I totally agree. I feel like it comes down to resources, right? Myself being a product of that, not having the right resources in the schools that we're provided with, right? They talk about zone schooling. They talk about, where we're afforded to go to school based on your socioeconomic status. And, I was fortunate to be at a school where we had teachers that cared as much as they did. And it kind of takes away from our ability to be able to produce certain things because we're not giving the opportunities that other people with other social and economic statuses are given. So it comes down to, is it fair? Did we get a chance to, display our talents, our strengths, our abilities on a certain stage to say we're able to perform at this level? And us being me specifically being able to be on a stage where I was able to have the opportunity to perform at Morehouse. Because before, the teacher that I was at my high school gave me the opportunity to say, hey, you can perform great here. Let's give you this opportunity. I didn't know where I was going. Right. So just being able to have that opportunity gave me a different lens of what I was able to do for me to believe in myself. And it definitely was eye-opening to say, wow, I can actually do this, because that was not opportunity that was given to me at first. And then when it was, I was like, wow, I'm confident in myself enough to perform on this stage. And then I was able to open the door for people that's coming behind me to say, yo, I think you should do this too. My younger sister, my younger cousins. And that's multiple people that's coming behind me and say, I did this and I think you should do it too. So our communities were blessed with these opportunities. But I think about the one or two or three or couple hundred of people that wasn't able to be granted the opportunity to say, hey, you should check out this opportunity. They were stuck with just community college. They were just stuck with whatever opportunities they had, but they wasn't granted opportunities to say, hey, try these other avenues for your success and so forth.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's important. And I'm hearing a couple of the same themes, right? The resources not being available, and then having people who actually care and are invested in the growth and achievement of the students that they're serving. Fred, did you want to hop in?
Yeah, like I agree with both gentlemen, but I also think there's more to it, right? So when we look at, so I'm basing on my experience, right? Mm-hmm. So I grew up in the projects. So and looking at a lot of the males a lot of the homeboys that I grew up with, I'm probably the only successful one, right? And when I look at the years of schooling that I had, I'm looking at the representation that we had too, right? Mm-hmm. So when we look at these schools, we're looking at who's teaching our babies, who's teaching us, right? And it's common to see a white female teaching us. It's common to maybe get a white male. And it's common right now is we see more black females teaching. I could count probably on my hands how many black males I've seen in the position to teach us. Mm-hmm. And this is before I even got into college, right? Before I got to high school. Like high school, I started seeing a little bit more, but it wasn't many, right? So when we go into these buildings, we go into these schools, our males are they seeing success? They're not seeing anybody who has that success. You know what they're seeing? They're seeing those on the outside of that building, those on the corner, those who they grew up with, right? Like for me, I didn't have a dad. Like the people I looked up to when I was younger was my caseworker at one point when I was, because I am adopted. So I was looking at my caseworker. That was my male role model. And then the drug dealers, I was on the corner, right? Because I was friends with their little brother. Those are the people I was looking up to as success. Like, oh, they got money, they got clothes, they got everything, right? So if it wasn't for like the support, if it wasn't for people who cared in my life to keep me on track, I would have went down that road because, to be honest, before I even got to Philip Escala, I was on the road to getting, joining gang life, right? I was outside, I was doing stuff, beating up people, doing jump-ins and stuff like that. But when it wasn't for like my grandmother and the principal at the school, like, no, we need to get him in like an opportunity, right? A lot of our males are not getting an opportunity. They don't have that person that's going to like yank their shirt, like, nah, you're not doing this. They don't have that, right? Even when I went and I started working for Brooklyn Life program, and most of my court-involved youth were males. Like, it was always the guys. And there was no, and when I had these aspirations and these talks with them, like, what do you want to do? I want to survive. I just want to, it wasn't like I want to get my high school diploma. Like, I just want to get money. I want to do this. Right? They're not seeing beyond just the dollar bill. They're not seeing beyond the community. They're not seeing beyond what they're surrounded by. So it comes from, what they're seeing in the school building, like who's teaching them, like the support, as we said before from Quincy, like who's that person? Who's the person that's caring in their life? The resources. It's a lot of things that comes with this, but also it's what, like who and what are they seeing? Like who's teaching them? Who's there in support with them? Like what are they seeing that's going to drive them to want to be successful? Because if this only success they're looking at is a rapper, a basketball player, a drug dealer, I don't care about getting a doctorate. I never even wanted to attend college, to be honest. When I was in high school, I was about to sign up for military. If it wasn't for Mickens, if it wasn't for my mentor Chris Smith, like if it wasn't for them, like, no, you going to college. I would have been a normal person in the hood trying to get my way out using the military, right? So we look at these gaps. What are the other avenues that our males are going to?
Right. Yeah. Denise, you want to round it up?
Of course I do. And I just have to say, he just name dropped his mentor. And I just remember having lunch with him. We would talk, man. But each of you said it. One thing that I've often tried to bring into these spaces when we're having these conversations is student voice. And not in the sense of we want to create a survey and get your feedback, but like we have to have spaces where we're bringing them into these kind of conversations because they absolutely have the answer. There's been many times where I ask kids, what's the experience for you? Here's the data, and why do you believe this is a contributing factor? And as recent as Thursday or Wednesday, I had a conversation with a group of students. Of course, it was work related, but I had an opportunity to just hear from them firsthand. And believe it or not, a lot of them actually have goals, aspirations of becoming successful, but don't often have the language or the tools to get them there. And then out of frustration, one of the young men said, Miss, you're dealing with Gen Z. And this is definitely like the popcorn generation. If it isn't glitter and glam, if it isn't coming at us fast, we're already over it. And so this is what we are competing with these days. And it contributes. Each of what you all said is spot on. And I'm just offering another layer of all of the things that we're dealing with, but we're competing with the Gen Z, the social media age. We're competing with act fast, you'll get it now. And we all know, especially if we're talking about a doctorate, that the game plan, the end goal and the game plan is not tomorrow. I remember, I'll never forget, and I hope he doesn't look at this video. Well, I hope he does, but I hope he X's out this part, but I'll never forget I had a student who kept telling me, Miss, I'm gonna be a doctor. I'm gonna be a doctor. And so when we sat down to start to actualize his plan and write it out, I said, you do 8 years here. And he said, whoa, hold up. How long? Oh, no. What can I get? The exact words. What can I get for 2 years? Like 2 years. I'm good for 2 years, miss. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Thank God he was in the 10th grade and he had some time to really get himself together. But, you know, sometimes they don't even realize what the game plan and how long it's going to take. And so they're frustrated very early on before they even get on the road or while they're in the road. We all know each of us right now can talk to or speak to just some of the tired days, or just, you know, even being in high school, there were so many complicated experiences that we've had that, you know, it built heart for many of us, but not everyone has the capacity to deal with and handle the rigor. And so it then contributes to how we show up, how we see ourselves. We're talking about the Great Divide. There are a lot of systems and structures that are not in place inside of educational spaces to really build that muscle, right? To educate on the options, the routes that we can take. And then it was already said, but I'm going to say it again, the resources that exist for families. You know, our last administration across our nation was not the biggest fan of supporting families of immigrants, people who were not born here, who have language barriers. And so then that contributes to the divide as well, because what types of systems and structures and supports and resources exist for those people who want opportunities and may not even have, you know, the language to get it. So there are just so many layers to what many of our students are up against and what they're facing.
Thank you so much. So I do want to give some concrete numbers as to when we talk about a divide, what this divide actually looks like. All right, so these are just some of the numbers here. Black women account for 58% of all African Americans holding a bachelor's degree, which means Black men account for 42. Black women account for 64% of all African Americans that hold a master's degree, which means Black men account for 36. African Americans, period, account for 6.5% of all earned doctoral degrees in the US. And as of recent years, I'd say in the last 10 years or so, 2/3 of those have been awarded to Black women. So when we talk about there's a growing divide, this is what that divide looks like. We're about 20% in difference. Other ethnic groups are around 3 to 5%. So what that means is one group might be 49% and the other might be like 52%, right? And that was our trajectory. So again, going back to the history of things, when Black people were finally able to be educated in the United States or receive formal education, we were on the same trajectory. So we were in that 2 to 3 point difference. And then of course, like we said, somewhere around the 70s, you saw that gap widen significantly, and we almost came back together. We were good for about 10 years, and then it's coming back. So the first thing I want to do is talk about policy. If any of you saw some of our previous discussions, one of the things that came up several times were policies that were in place that impact communities of color before you're even born. So your healthcare, the healthcare of the mother while she's pregnant with her child. And we know that there are major disparities in the medical field regarding, you know, African Americans and women of color, even as it pertains to pregnancy and prenatal care. And then you get to pre-K, and we're already looking at the little Black boys as more active, hyperactive, more behavioral. And then when they get into school, they're primed for being targeted for special education labels, disciplinary policies, those types of things. So, and I'm gonna particularly aim these questions to Quincy and Denise. This first question, what are some of the policies that you've noticed play a part? And I want to particularly highlight these differences in what you're seeing in Black girls and boys, because Black girls are also at risk for higher targeting for those things. So the prison to pipeline concept doesn't just apply to Black males, it also applies to Black girls. So Black girls are also suspended about 5 times more than white girls. But Black boys still kind of rank the highest in terms of disciplinary infractions, being suspended from school, being expelled. And depending on the study that you look like, it's Black boys, then white boys, then Black girls. And then other studies, it's Black boys, then Black girls, and then everybody else. So what are some of the policies that you guys have noticed, both as students, and again, I like this group because I know for a fact that not only are we educators on this side, we've been in this system. We are all products of the public school system. So what are some things that you noticed and saw both as a student and now as an educator? And what do you think kind of needs to happen to close those gaps? And either of you can jump in.
Okay, no need for silence. We are products of that. And unfortunately, it's the hands that we're dealt. Now, me being an educator now and also being a student back then, it's sort of like I watched something today where us as Black men, we're only given sports or become the doctor, lawyer, and all those other options, right? And outside of that, we're told to provide. We have to find ways to provide. So we're taught to hustle from day one. Get money, provide, be a man, be strong, right? And Black women, they're taught those skills to be a nurturer and all these other things. But the fact that we're on the top of that totem pole is, not only are we taught all these things, but we're given limited options. Of course, it goes back to resources. And unfortunately, even when I was in school, it was sort of like, you have to figure it out now or just go out there and find something that'll make you sustainable to be able to do whatever you choose to do. And it's not fair, of course, obviously, but as we move forward and we look at the generations that came before us, it's the same thing. So you go into the world and you try to figure it out, and you get we have these options for jobs, and you're trying to figure it out whether you're going to be a mechanic. You learn a trade, let's just say, call it a trade, or you're going to go to school, right? A lot of us go to school and say, let's go to school and get an education. A lot of us don't even know what to major in. We just choose a major to say we're majoring something to get a degree and end up with debt. And then you figure out whatever you want to do, again, undecided once you get out of school. Hopefully go to a school that leads you on that track. So I feel like when it comes to, as far as the education system, they label you early. That's one. Then you have to try to figure yourself out, because now you're functioning off of this label. And it goes back to my original point. Some of us don't even know our own strengths. Like when I was in school, I couldn't even tell you like what was my main strength. I just knew to get good grades. That's it. You tell me what was my favorite subject? Well, I like this one because it's easy. It's not, you had a passion for these things. So I just feel like, we're labeled early. We have to figure out what we're going to do. We don't have any correct guidance. So we go out into the world, and now we have to figure out, what do we want to do? How do we provide? We're taught to hustle. We're taught to just get a job, make money. And then you go out and it's like, we don't know how to pinpoint a specialty. We don't know how to pinpoint a specific skill so that we can use that to be innovators, inventors, someone that's a captive of their industry to be able to provide for our family on another level. And I want to say that as an introductory part, because there's another side to that I want to add to it, but I'm just leave the mic over to.
Thank you so much. One of the policies that definitely comes to mind are the punishment policies. And there are just so many of them. But if I were to take it back to when I was in school, I have this story that my family and I talk about all the time. We can laugh today, but when you really think about it, it's very sad. I was in middle school and it was the day of the state test. I've been preparing. I was like so revved up. My teacher made it seem like it was a do or die type situation. So I was like on 10 the entire morning. And, you know, they had our desks in rows. We all sat down about less than 6 feet away from each other. And all of the assignments and everything that was on the wall were covered. We all sat down ready to take this test, and I noticed that my pencil wasn't near me. So I asked my friend, I whispered over to her, I said, did you see my pencil? And why did I say that? My teacher screamed my name, made me stand up, and said, you are out. No test for you. I think I put on the biggest meltdown. They sent me to the guidance counselor and said, that's it. She's not taking the test. She was talking during the test. The test didn't even have to start yet, but I was talking during the test. And long story short, I put on such a scene in the guidance counselor's office that they said, okay, in order for you to take the test, your mother has to come up and you have to sit in the guidance suite. You can't take the test in the same room with your friends. I don't think I ever recovered from that. I don't even remember if I did well on that test or not. All I know is my mother had to leave her job, rush over to my school just so she can watch me take an exam. Talk about anxiety inducing. It's already crazy enough that you have to take some sort of state exam, but to then be punished and have your mom sit there, that's another added layer of anxiety. Thank God my mother's awesome, but that was just a lot. And when I think about just how far we are willing to go to implement a punishment on a child for being a child, it's just insane to me. And I think policies like that, we've seen outrageous policies pop up across the nation when it comes to school, from the way you wear your hair to how you dress. All these things are like, we have to keep you in line. You're not allowed to be. Meanwhile, if the end goal is to become an adult and to be a contributing member to society, how many times have we whispered over to another cubicle to talk to our friends? Or how many times we've, been really proud of a hairstyle and shown it off to the world on our social media pages, but yet we tell children not to do certain things when it comes to learning. I think learning is a lifelong experience that should not be rigid and just outrageous punishments attached to it. It's very anxiety inducing, and then you don't allow the space for the child to just be a child. So when we talk about, what are some policies in place, that the punishment policies, that's what comes to mind for me, and just the pressures that come along with it.
Yeah. And I'm bringing Freddie on here because I want to move into my next question, which is the impact of punishment on this trajectory that we're seeing. And it's so interesting that you're telling that story, because I was actually suspended from school in the 3rd grade because for inciting a riot in the 3rd grade. It was a situation, it was a bullying situation, and I was trying to actually neutralize the situation, right? But you can't be like, you can't look like you're taking the side of the person that's being picked on, right? So I'm over here like, I'm trying to tell her, shut up, because I want her to stop being bullied, but I can't look like I'm taking her side. And so she went and she named everybody that was a part of this situation, and I got suspended. for inciting a riot. That is actually what the charge was against an 8-year-old in the 3rd grade. And just like you had awesome parents, I had awesome, they didn't know who my parents were. So my parents were like, okay, well, first of all, who was even there? You know, right? So it gets into like, okay, there should have been an adult there. It should have never got to that level. It should have never been this. It should have never been that. So you're going to reverse the suspension and you're going to give her back that missing day from when she wasn't allowed to come to school because she shouldn't have been suspended, you know. But everybody doesn't have those parents. Everybody doesn't have somebody that is there to fight for them. But it's so interesting that you told that story because that was me, 8 years old, accused of inciting a riot. So Fred, what are your thoughts? And I know you had sent some material over about particularly children being arrested in school. So I want you to give your thoughts, and then I'm going to bring everybody back in the room because I want us to explore that a little bit too.
Yeah. So, you know, it's very funny that we're actually talking about this, the punishment, the crime and punishment, right? After we just got from having a president that was all about law and order. So that's been such a response for a lot of our schools for years, right? This law and order, this, you know, no tolerance. Things have to be a certain type of way. So for years, we've seen a lot of our, you know, students of color being, you know, picked out, like literally because of their behaviors, because of certain things they demonstrate is against the policy of the school or the district. You know, these schools that have these no tolerance, one infraction, suspension, right? So we look at, say, for example, we look at New York City, right? So I'm going to look at the level of, you know, principal suspension and then the superintendent suspension, right? So being at Boys and Girls is very good at doing this at one point, right? And we all know this. So at one point, if you got into a fight, right? You got into a situation, you get that principal suspension, more than likely, the result of that, what will happen is that you get an M5, right? So if you got an M5, you don't get a regular schedule. What happens is that you end up going into, like, those students will end up going to the auditorium. And in the auditorium, that will be their schooling, right? They'll get work to complete there and do that, right? So a lot of the people who I knew who got M5s were males. This is Boys and Girls High School. There's no white students. There's not a lot of, there's barely any Asians. It's like probably one, me. But it's, if I'm there and I'm there all day because I had a fight and I have one incident that happened to get to me. What is that for? Now it's hard for me to get my credits back up. It's hard for me to make up work. What do you think is going to happen? The result is that F school.
Yeah.
I don't see no successful road here. I don't see, y'all label me as somebody who's an issue, somebody who's a problem, right? So I've worked with other deans and preparing them to go testify for superintendent suspensions. So for superintendent suspensions, you get that court hearing, you get that hearing, right? And you gotta go down to downtown. You gotta go give your case to why this student deserves that superintendent suspension. That superintendent suspension, right, could really demoralize a student, right? And I've had friends who've gotten it because, you know, they brought a knife to school, not knowing that they had it in their book bag. And if you were in New York City at that time for school, that's for like during that 03 to like, you know, early 2010, this is when we start to see schools transition more into like a prison type. You got to come in, you got to go through scanning, you got to get patted down, you have to no metal, anything like that. So, I mean, we come from this community sometimes that, you know, we carry things because of certain reasons, or, you know, it might be some other issues I have outside. So I had a friend that came in with a knife, forgot he had it, got that superintendent suspension. That superintendent suspension, it's not just a 30-day suspension. That is like pretty much you're out almost for the whole year. So then when you go to the suspension sites, you're not getting the most adequate, you know, education. You're there with other kids who are like-minded, or who probably got some circumstances, or who are really in at the point where they're like, the hell with this, right? So if I'm going through that situation and I'm trying to come back to school the next year or whenever my suspension is up, my view of school is going to be different. My view of everybody else is not going to be the same as it was before I left. So I might not care about succeeding as much as I did before, or I might feel the system is really against me, right? Yeah. So now schools, and I had a lot of my career in charter schools. Now schools are very big on not hitting certain numbers, right? Because this is a number game now. This is when we talk about policy. Policies right now is a number game. You got it. Retention is a number game in your policies. The number of suspension, a number game. The number of IEPs and the number of students with disability is big on the policies that we set forth. And all of this goes back down to the money these schools get. It goes back to the resources they get. All right. If a school has a lot of suspensions, that's a red flag. And when that's a red flag, when they start to audit these schools, they're trying to figure out why are there so much suspensions now, right? So now we start to see schools, and not just in New York City, but in other areas, now start to implement restorative justice practices, right? As an alternative to suspensions, right? Alternative to these type of punishments that honestly were the biggest contributor from that school to prison pipeline. But the damage has been so, it's already sold in the fabric of our education system here, right? If my parent was one of those kids that was suspended or went through that stuff, their outlook or their teaching and education might not be the same. Their value of education or their involvement in my education might not be the same for a parent who didn't go through any of that. We're labeled at times. And I go back to my point from earlier. And I wanted to connect that, right? So when we talk about the representation, a lot of these white teachers that come into our buildings are scared. And I'll be quite frank, they're scared. Yes. Before I started with DOE, I worked for New Vision's charter school in the South Bronx. So let me tell you a little bit about charter, right, if you don't know. A lot of charters don't require teachers to have a full certification in teaching. Like for New York City educators, you gotta go through that whole TPA. You gotta do a lot of things to get your teacher license. So for a lot of charter schools, you come in, you might have just finished your bachelor's and gotten your teacher your certain things to teach. I realized when I started in the South Bronx, a lot of the new staff that came in with me weren't from New York City. They were young white educators that were from outside, right? So when you put that those types of individuals in communities that have a long history of drug abuse, have a long history of living in poverty, have a long history of a lot of setbacks, they're already coming in biases already. They're already looking at these kids as, all right, they're problematic, or I gotta coddle them certain ways, right? They don't understand the behaviors. They don't understand that a lot of this behavior that we're seeing is generational. A lot of this stuff that we're seeing is things that have been going on for years for them, right? So they need somebody who looks like them, who can understand the background. So when these teachers come in and Daquan is giving an issue or is talking back, nah, Daquan is not mad at you. Daquan is mad because his dad not there, or when he came home last night, nobody was home. So he had to figure out what he's eating. Or now he got to walk through, because certain schools in the hood, you got to walk through 2 different projects. So now I got to make sure I keep a face on, and I have to play that role. So when I get into that building, how do I take that role off? So I don't get tested by other people, right? But they don't understand that. So then when he acts out, can I get a dean? That's an issue. And then that leads to a lot of suspensions that we've seen. That leads to a lot of the punishable things that we see now. And I've been in circumstances where I've had to write court letters. I've buried students because of a lot of these situations. I've never been in court so much for young Black and Latino males in my life, right? And to see. And having to go to schools and talk to some of the staff members about their circumstances, like, what happened? How are they in school? Some of the staff members don't even know their names. But you see that kid as only a problem, but you don't know their name. There's a lot of things when it comes to these policies. But then there's also the staff in these buildings, in these schools, and it's not just in New York City, but all around, are not the most adequate that we have.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that you're making, because again, all of that goes back to resource, planning, policy, procedure. We're talking about preparedness. Even the schools are not prepared for our kids, right? And we're talking about, we want to talk about our kids being prepared or our communities being prepared for the world. The world's not prepared for them. And they've had 500 years to get there, right? And we're still not there. And I want to say, Freddie, while you were talking, Denise, you might have noticed Denise and I started laughing because her brother's name is actually Daquan. So when you said Daquan.
But it's crazy because the name sometimes it's a lot of the biases too just come from like these teachers like the names. Like,
from the name. Yeah, they look at the name and they decide that they're a problem. I want Donald to jump in because a lot of also what you touched on, Freddie, is trauma. You're talking about educational trauma from, like you said, just hearing the name or the phrase Superintendent Suspension. I mean, you don't even have to know what that entails. That's a big deal. And I have seen school staff intimidate students with that. Oh no, that sounds like a superintendent suspension. So that alone, and it's meant to strike fear into that student. And the goal, I guess, is to get them to shape up and behave better. But like you said, if there are these other mitigating factors that really prevent you from doing that successfully, you're already putting a dark cloud over my head. Right. So you're already traumatizing me. And even in the age of restorative justice, a lot of restorative justice ends up being executed in a very punitive way anyway. So I want us to get into that, too. But Donald, Dr. Garner, I know you work specifically with Black males who are dealing with trauma. So can you just touch a little bit on that and how you see that playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, thank you for, everybody's past comments on what we're unpacking. I definitely, everything that was being said was resonating with me. So I do, through my education consulting firm, I do a lot of content design for young men of color. And one of my main clients, and I even hate saying that they're my client, because at this point it's family, but do a lot of work with the Eagle Academy for Young Men here in New York City, as well as Newark, New Jersey. So for the past decade, literally, I've had the privilege and the opportunity of working in a powerful space where I'm actually seeing what it looks like to have affirming, spaces for young men of color. Of course, even with our challenges that we have, but nonetheless affirming spaces, perhaps more than some of our more traditional spaces. So there's terminology that, in the social work world we use. And I even learned this when I was doing my research with people coming home from prison, a term called disenfranchised grief. And it is a dressed up term that understands, or that unpacks rather, a level of trauma and grief that is invalidated, under-examined, not as acknowledged, compared to other, traditional forms of grief that are more acceptable. Like, for instance, acceptable, if you lost your grandmother, you lost a parent. Not acceptable if one of your friends died by gun violence, or not acceptable if one of your friends, died by suicide, right? And so even before COVID-19 and the pandemic, that is wreaked havoc on our entire world, there was a level of disenfranchised grief that many of our schools of color, that are situated, nestled in, economically distressed communities experience more than people who do not have those experiences. And so trauma is definitely first and foremost not utilizing a trauma-informed approach is not a part of our teacher education programs. So again, my lens, from working at the New York City Department of Ed was connecting with education departments, deans, and professors who were teaching the incoming teachers that were going to be across in our classrooms, right in front of our scholars. So just even understanding what trauma is, also understanding, the nuances that exist, among, people of color compared to non-people of color is not as widely, discussed. It might be a class, it might be a professional development here or professional development there, but nothing, Dr. Barnes, to the extent where every adult who is interacting with our kids is widely familiar with. So I would say, when you ask me to unpack, how trauma is being played out, I would say it's being played out as it's always being played out, incident after incident that our kids are faced with well before COVID is a part of their lived experience. It's a part of, how they are taking on, their identity, right? So if it's not being addressed properly, healthily, it's continuing to happen to them, right? So you have that. And then I would say also, that there is a significant, as I just mentioned, a significant, breakdown in terms of not even a breakdown, but there's just an underappreciation for how we, ensure that educators and other adults, are understanding what to do, when students are coming to them with, mountains of issues that are happening to them, on a daily basis. So, we're in for, and I just did a talk earlier today on Clubhouse about the role of school social work, in our classrooms. And I had two educators, on the panel, well, not on the panel, but in the room. And literally, you all, we have not even grappled with, and I know my colleagues, Freddie, Denise, even Quincy, everybody on this, on this talk this evening can attest to this. We have yet to even comprehend and appreciate the magnitude of what we're getting ready to experience in the event, schools open and we're physically in front of our students, particularly our Black and brown kids.
Yeah. And I actually want to start moving in the direction of what can we do, right? Like, first of all, what do we do? Because like I said, everybody on here has something that they have already started, or you have something that's in the works. And I'm at this point of, obviously, we cannot rely on the system, right, to adequately serve our kids in whatever kind of way. And I do want to highlight my high school, Benjamin Banneker Academy, and the staff that we had. Most who have moved on to become their own principals or started, their own schools. And I know Quincy worked with one of our former teachers after he moved on and became a principal. But I always highlight Banneker because it was so unique in the way that they set up that school environment. So first of all, we had the Black male teachers. Almost all of our teaching staff actually were Black. And that was such a big deal because you go into school and all of your teaching staff looks like you. All of your classmates, for the most part, they look like you. And so we had a certain level of privilege because you didn't have to go into a room and be the Black kid. You got to just go in the room and be yourself. The other thing that I always found to be so dynamic, and we took it for granted at the time, but later on, not realizing how important that was, they talked to us about our issues. You know, we grew up again during the whole stop and frisk era. So I remember, and again, it was the boys more so than the girls. So that is definitely one dynamic. I remember my classmates coming into school traumatized because they were stopped by the police on the way to school and had their book bag searched. And the teacher would not teach the lesson until they were able to unpack that with their kids, right? So it wasn't a situation of, all right, well, you're here now, get over it. We got to get to this lesson. It was like, nah, let's have a conversation about that. You know, this is the world that you live in. This is the, right? This is the expectation, but this does not define who you are. And those conversations were had, and they created a space where you got to be, you weren't the Black kid, but you got to be a Black kid. Right. And I always laugh. I think about one of my English teachers. He would come in and he would use all the urban slang and, you know, you be this, you be that, whatever. But when it was time to break down those sentence structures, like, you know, so they allowed us to be who we were genuinely, no pretending, because that was who they were. So exactly like Freddie had said a little bit earlier, they knew where we were coming from. They knew how to approach us. And it was a genuine discourse. Right. So it wasn't pretending. It wasn't trying to figure us out. They knew us because they were us. Right. So what has to be, and the other thing I want to make a point is a lot of them did things that actually broke the rules, but it was to support their students, to support their kids and make sure that everybody had an opportunity, if they really wanted to graduate. Because exactly like Freddie said, there were kids that came to school with weapons. And they could have reported it, and you know, school policy is they should have reported it, but they did it because they said, no, this kid needs a chance. Right? So let's talk about that. How can we give our kids chances when they're in a system that really looks for opportunities to shut them down at every turn? And I'm gonna let Quincy talk first.
Oh my God, you've brought so many memories. And let me let y'all know, Dr. Barnes, Jaleesa, and she's been like this. I've been calling her Dr. Barnes before she got decided.
I know, you did.
I spoke with this, I was like, you, that's been you. You spoke on a lot of different things, man. Like, and I feel like letting us be us is important because it's okay to be who you are. I feel like that's one thing that they let us understand. It's okay. And when Dr. Barnes was speaking, something that came to me was Miss Tracy Cook Person, one of our ELA teachers. We have so many teachers we can speak about that were profound in what they did. She educated us so like she went above and beyond. She went against the grain for us to understand who you are, what's your identity, and why you should put so much energy in that, because that's your power, right? And she said, I'm going to educate you because you are going to be the next generation that's going to educate my future kids. 2 years ago, I literally taught her daughter in history, like literally 2 years ago. And I was able to say that at the orientation because, and her daughter was like, yo, you teach just like mom. Like you speak just like my mother. And it's like, you embed that into, you know, the students that you teach. And it also goes back to, you know, we are the figures that let our students know who they are. We inform them of who they are, because it's great. Freddie said this, like we have walked the same streets of these kids way before they were here. And I'm pretty sure all of you as educators, you can hear the year or see the year your kids were born, your students were born, and you're like, he was really born yesterday. We're the old folk that used to talk to us like, oh, you a baby. I'm like, I've been here for 14 years. It's like, bro, you know what I was doing when you was 14? You know, and it goes back to, you know, us having that, we're those people now that have that experience, and we can look at students and look at them and say, I know what you're doing. I know who you are because I was there. So we walked in the same shoes, we walked in the same streets, we had the same experiences, and we could look at these kids and guide them because, and Mr. Like, oh, you don't know me, Mr. Merrill, you don't know me, Dr. Listen, yes, I do. Because all those phases you're going through, been there, done that, conquered it. I'm trying to let you know that, hey, I understand your pain. As Freddie also said, because you hit on a lot of points, Freddie, and I had those feelings. I understand your pain. I know how that looks. I know how that makes you feel in front of your peers. So I'm trying to help you overcome that and how to use it as your power. And a lot of us, and it's another part that Dr. Barnes said that came to our high school was our teachers were able to go against the grain in a certain point where it was like, they're willing to risk their jobs to teach us certain things about ourselves. Like, forget this curriculum. Let's go into this.
And literally said that I will lose my job over you. I got another paycheck. Go ahead.
No, seriously. And they would literally, they'll pray for you. Like, I didn't, like, on a side note, I didn't get to Morehouse the traditional way because I didn't know about HBCUs. I had teachers like Mr. Turner, and I had teachers like deans like Mr. Walton that came in and said, bro, you got other, because I was a ball player. You know, I don't look like a ball player now, you know, because of age and, you know, all these other things. But, you know, but I was a ball player. So I was like, I'm going to Duke, I'm going to North Carolina. It's like, yo, listen, you got potential to do these things. And they guided me. It's like, this is a great opportunity for you, you know? And the fact that they were there to guide me was a big thing. You didn't have those father figures, as you guys talked about, that were able to say, hey, you should go to these schools. Or even if you did, they didn't have the experience. They didn't have the education behind it. So I love the way that went because, you know, it took a village. It took a village. The village of the school. So many different teachers that were HBCU grads. So many teachers that took their job beyond the description of what they signed up for. To say, I'm going to not only be your teacher, I'm going to be your mentor. I'm going to be your parent. I'm going to be your big brother, your big sister. And they're going to nurture you to get there. And I look at myself and, you know, Dr. Barnes, and it's like, we walked through those hallways and that's what those teachers were for us. They stayed well past dismissal. They let you in their classrooms during lunchtime. Yeah. You know, and it's like, even though you hated them during class, after class, they were your best friend.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. They actually had that program 9 to 9. I don't know. Has any of the rest of you heard of that? 9 to 9? Freddie, you're not in. Yes. So they implemented this program where on Saturdays at from 9 a.m. literally to 9 p.m. on a Saturday, you could come in and prepare for your Regents exam. So gave of themselves, gave of their time. And again, it wasn't just work. It was you come in, you need somebody to talk to. You gotta, you know, you have some testing anxiety. We're gonna make some space for you to deal with that. These are some strategies that you can use. So again, going back into this was not a systematic, you know, a educational systematic thing. It was strategic on behalf of our school staff and administration. You know, but they said, we're going to do more than what this system is actually set up to do. And they created an entire school climate to make that happen. The other thing I want to touch on is I've heard the term support quite a bit tonight, right? So support, guidance, giving space to be yourself. One of the articles I looked at and shared with you guys were coping strategies and the differences between how boys cope with things and how girls cope with things. And we can say it's a product of conditioning. It's a product of, you know, social constructs of gender. But what they found was that girls do tend to seek out support. So whether they go and they talk to their friends, they go and they find a mentor, they find somebody that will kind of support them and kind of help them through it. Whereas boys, and this isn't even just a Black community thing, this is just what they found in men and males, is that they tend to kind of withdraw and try to figure it out on their own. And one of the things that I think Quincy and I touched on was that really the support was brought to us, right? So we ended up in a school, we were fortunate enough to be in a school where that was brought to us and that was woven into the fabric of that school community. But obviously that's not the norm, right? That was the exception and not the norm. So what can we do? Because it seems to be the standard, and you guys can also touch on, have you observed that? Have you observed where males are not really going to reach out for the support? So if nobody is offering it to them, you know, how are they going to get it? Like, what have you guys observed? And I'm going to let the guys touch on that. And then Denise, I want you to jump in too.
Well, I'll go. So being a male school counselor, right, is like anatomy. Like it's not many of us, right? So when we talk about supports, sometimes, you know, males don't want to talk to females about problems. right? You're not going to understand it. You might not, I don't feel comfortable in telling you certain things, right? So, and I think for every school building I've been at, except for one in particular, I've been the only male mental health support in that building, right? Even when I went to my grad program at St. John's, I was one of the only males. I was the only male at my interview to get into the grad program, right? So now, even now, like I with the males, like I go to them, I'll crack jokes with them. I remember when I was an intern at CS21, I had one kid and he was in first grade, giving issues, went to the classroom, talked to him, right? I was like, come outside, and I got on the floor with him, right? So what I was taught, get on, like, as a counselor, get on the same level as your kid, right? No matter what. So I got on the floor with them. Like, I didn't care. I'm on the floor. I'm gonna talk to you, right? So for a lot of our males, like whether black or white or whatever, you're taught to enclose. You're not taught to release. You're not taught to really be in one with your emotion, right? So for a lot of those who are in our support position, you got to maneuver a lot different, right? You have to utilize a lot of different strategies. Like, you might have to use like YouTube. You might have to use certain instruments just to get them open. So sometimes what I tell staff now and teachers, like, let me know, and be look at the nonverbals. Don't look at just the verbal. Males are not always going to tell you verbally. Look at the nonverbals. Tell me how they're looking. They got the hood on all day and they're just sitting in the back. All right, cool. Let me know. Let me talk to them. Let me pull them outside real quick so I'm not addressing them in front of everybody. Right? So a lot of buildings don't have that. A lot of schools don't have that, that male figure that's going to be able to give them that support and they could be vulnerable with, right? So for a lot of schools, and they need to start to adapt and develop programs where they are given safe space, right? So in a couple others, I've been able to form programs in almost every school I've worked at. So the first charter school, the second charter school I worked at in East New York, I developed a after-school program called Young Men of Purpose, right? So it was geared toward those at-risk males, right? And in the afternoon, we'd be able to have real conversations with them, do activities with them, have them really like release, have them relax. They don't have to be so tense in that day, right? But I know that most of those kids will have not come to me about an issue unless they were forced to, or unless a teacher sent them, right? So there has to be programs and money, and this goes down to that money resources thing. We have to start demanding these schools to, develop these programs or use it, because, DOE has a thing where it's Young Men of Purpose or something like that, where male educators, no matter whether you're a para or whatever it is, to get involved and mentor these things. Like, this goes down to that. It doesn't have to be a school psychologist, doesn't have to be a social worker, doesn't have to be a counselor. Whoever that male feels comfortable with talking to, you have to have that opportunity. You have to have that stakeholder. But the thing about it, when you look at schools, it goes back to that policy. You got to get this done. This has to be done. There's no room. You burn out a lot of educators, right? And then I know for me, and when I was in charter's a lot harder. When you're like there till 5 o'clock and you're there from the morning, by the time you get 5 o'clock, I don't want to do nothing. Nothing at all. No, nothing extra unless you're paying me. So that also leaves a lot of doors closed because you hammer in so many things they have to achieve and do during the day, that doesn't leave them with a lot of energy or opportunity really to develop these programs or get involved with certain things like this. So our males are left out there with really nobody to go to. So we have to start, especially as young educators, right? We have to start demanding this. And especially in New York City, and where we're seeing a lot of this data come, really being our males are going to this side and our female students are going this way. We have to start to really demand these programs, and they need an outlet, and they need those who are in the field too. Like, so I'm hoping more males get into the support field so they can be able to be that, that voice.
Dr. Garner, what are your thoughts? Oh, yeah. I want you and then Dr. Garner.
Okay, I'll be very quickly. Something that comes to mind is making purpose popular, and just, showing students that they have purpose, they have access to purpose, and helping them to unlock that potential. Freddie mentioned a lot about not having that representation. And before I started managing and servicing counselors across the city, I was a college counselor at a local high school. And one of the things that I noticed very early on was a lack of representation and a lack of financial resources or even access. I would have signed my students up for programs and they wouldn't get accepted to those programs. And so I didn't stop there. One of the things that I would do is, and I'm sharing this because there may be a counselor watching, or there may be a person who is passionate about kids watching and feeling the burden of the limitations and the lack of resources and representation. I would tap into my own network. I never stopped. I don't care if it was like my uncle or a couple brothers from the church or somebody who was in my graduate school class. I would tap into my network and I would say like, hey, Donald, Freddie, Quincy, y'all are some dope brothers. Do you want to come to our career day and speak to our kids? Or I would, instead of teaching this lesson on financial literacy, I'm gonna bring Brother Quincy in and have him share his story of how he paid for college, right? And I would just keep putting faces. And I'm saying that as a person of color and as a woman who is very like, I can never speak to a male's experience because I've never been a male and I don't desire to be one. So I can never speak to it, but that I had to think of ways to think outside of the box, things that are in my locus of control. I can't pay the Obamas to come to our school. I tried to send a message to Chance the Rapper, but he didn't respond, right? So I'm going down to the Zoom land and I'm gonna reach out to Freddie or Quincy and ask them. So like just bringing in people who are of quality to speak to our children and to show them images of Black excellence, stories. People power is the best power to me. And then another thing that we can do is crowdsource with young people. Sometimes what we think they're looking for or want is not in line with what they actually want and what we know. And so bringing them into the planning meetings, that's how many of us are sharing stories about how this teacher, I have just as many stories as Quincy about educators at my high school, in my middle school, in my elementary school, who pushed me and said, no, you're going to be different. You're going to stand out. You're going to be across the nation teaching. You're going to do, like, spoke into my life. And so doing that to young people that we have access to is huge. We know because we're the recipients. We're living it out now. He said he was teaching his teacher's kid. And so when are we going to open our big mouths and say, look, Daquan, you are the next you're the next thing. You're the next best thing. And I'm going to groom you. I'm going to take you under my wing. You're going to lead the class. You're going to facilitate this workshop. And just putting them before those experiences so they have room to test out their skills and ability and to actually develop them. And then lastly, we need to show up to important meetings where conversations are happening. When is the last time we attended a city council meeting? When did we push and actually push policies and push back on some of the conversations that are happening without us and saying, hey, I need to be in the room. me with my doctorate, me with my degree. I need to be in the room and have something to say. And I'm going to bring these 3 kids with me so that you have some real life stories and you can make it real. Like, we need to step up and be a part of the change. And it's not necessarily, oh, we need to lead a protest, right? Because sometimes we teach our young people that it's in, you know, the outward experience. And I'm not even against, like, I won't ever say I'm against protesting. Like, go ahead, like, let our voices be heard. But then after we let our voices be heard, we have to show up behind the scenes where those conversations are happening. If other people can show up and storm the Capitol and think that that's the way they're going to get answers, best believe I'm going to go to a town hall. I'm going to tell my young people, go volunteer. I'll never forget, this is the last point. I'll never forget one of my leaders, someone who I really admire, actually suggested that I actually go out and volunteer to work with our city council member. And at first I was just like, oh my God, no. I thought that was such a big deal. But me going and showing up and saying, hi, I'd like to volunteer for you, led me down the path of understanding untapped leadership skills that I had. It gave me another level of discipline, and it gave me access that I'm still utilizing to this day, the network of people that I interacted with as a young person, saying I'm going to go volunteer at the city council. So like getting our young people connected in our city to be a part of policy and decision making is really where it's at. And that's why I'm saying, like, we need to really, truly make purpose popular, showing them, like, this is where your purpose is. You want access to, you want change in your community, this is where it is. And I think that is like the driving force. That's what's within our locus of control, where we're not necessarily looking at the deficit, but looking at the gains that can come from that.
That's awesome. And when we hear from Dr. Garner, I'm going to jump back to Denise and Quincy, because I want you to talk a little bit about your B boxes and how it's going to establish a new trajectory. So I got another question for you. Dr. Garner, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So again, thank you for what each of you have already lifted up. I want to acknowledge, so the work that I do, that I'm familiar with, again, at the Eagle Academy for Young Men, and I am predominantly speaking from the lens of, a person who has, researched and have direct community experience and supplemented educational experiences for young men of color, not as a classroom teacher, right? So I'm not speaking from that perspective. But given the fact that I know so much about Eagle, one thing I can say that's unique in terms of how young men of color, Black boys, even Latino boys, respond, which is the question, Dr. Barnes, you lifted up. Interestingly enough, you all, many of our, and I don't know all the data, I had it some years ago, but many of our educators that are in our Eagle network are women, right? And what I've discovered, when I started doing teacher recruitment work for Eagle initially as a consultant, is that our young men, tend to respond even better, to our female teachers in some cases than they do men, largely because of the family composition, that's in the home, right? So, many of our boys are still being reared, by single Black moms, right? And so them having a matriarch or a nurturing female character or a person in their life is common. And so, and this is not in all cases, but this is in a lot of cases, that there can be some tension, between that young man of color and an educator, male that is squaring, right before him. So again, Dr. Barnes, when we were talking about trauma, you can see if a young man of color has not been raised by his father, and seeing a man of color, even though he is well-intentioned, he's there for them, he's trying to make sure that they're set up for success, that could still, incite some level of trauma and grief, for that matter, that again, if we don't have a space to unpack it, can be problematic. So what Eagle has done that I see, is also being replicated by other schools that we, consult with, is that we create, everything that we do is from the relational model, the relational learning perspective, right? So as it's been lifted up earlier, if you want to really, support, lift up the experiences of how, young men of color are coping, that school, that teacher has to be a relational learner. That school has to be a relational learning oriented school, right? Which means, it's centered on at the core, getting to know every single thing as much as possible, rather not everything, but as many details about nicknames, where they hang out at, what relationships they have outside of the school community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, about that young man in the event that when problems occur, when situations happen, traumatic events occur, that there are a myriad of platforms that can be created to respond to problem behavior, in lieu of, the traditional route of suspending and expelling some of our students. So I would say that is super key. We also have a house model, where our young men are in groups of like 25, maybe even more per grade, where they are in a house model that represents a prominent African American or Hispanic and Latino brother, Muhammad Ali, Dr. King, Malcolm X, et cetera, et cetera. So in our schools, that's built in the DNA, of an equal school, and again, even a non-equal school for some of you who are listening, and you want to model this same, behavior, have more artifacts, in your school community that represent, men of color who are doing, excellent things, even women of color who are doing excellent things, across the country. So I love what you lifted up, Denise, in terms of bringing your friends, your colleagues, to be in front of our kids on a regular basis, and again, just modeling. I also want to say this last part that I think is super key, and I am now speaking from, every single piece of literature, book that I've read from Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, from who else? Frederick Douglass, Carter G. Woodson. We as the Black intelligentsia, and I'm going to say this because we are Black intelligentsia. I know there's many people who are going to be listening to this broadcast are a part of the Black intelligentsia. And if you don't know what that means, it is a person who has had the privilege and the humble privilege of being able to leave your community and get education, right? And now that I've gotten more mature, it's not all about just college education. Any form of education that is beyond whatever you were exposed to, that can uplift a particular people and your people. I get chills just thinking about it. Your people in particular is what I'm talking about. I believe with my pinky toe, Dr. Barnes, that we need to come together and create schools for our Black children. I believe that Freddie, a lot of the things that you're talking about, I was listening to you and I could feel the tension, and all of us, Quincy as well, Denise, if we all came together and put our minds together and created public schools, Montessori schools.
Come on.
And that's all I'm gonna say. I yield my time. I literally have chills all of my arms just thinking about it. But I think that is the agenda. That is the mission. And when I think about our elders, our ancestors, who are still with us right now, even on this call, that is what I would say their push would be towards us. Get together, create these spaces, create this infrastructure to educate, our young Black minds.
Yeah. Quincy, I want you to jump in with your thoughts, and then I want to talk about social emotional learning before we get here, because a lot of what we've talked about really are kind of on the tail ends of the trajectory that gets started again before our kids even get to school, right? So before high school, before middle school, before third grade, right? All the labeling, all the expectations, because with the labels come expectations. And one thing, I don't want to jump in front of Quincy, but how many of you have ever been in a school and seen the police called on a child? Just raise your hand. How many of you have seen the police called on a child under the age of 16? Under the age of 10? Oh, really? I have. Oh,
Only-
Freddie too?
Only read stories, but haven't seen
EMS, not even just the police, but EMS.
I've seen parents begging the school not to call EMS because their kid was behavioral. I worked in Far Rockaway, and I had a parent who had 3 boys with autism. All 3 of them had medical and medical diagnoses and educational classifications of autism. And she worked in Brooklyn. And every single day, one of her kids would have an episode. And the problem was the school wanted them out. They wanted them in a specialized school, but they hadn't done their part to provide interventions and supports. And as the school psychologist, I was like, you're not going to put my name on no IEP, sending no kid to an alternative school, and there's no paper trail to show that the school did everything they could to support them. So they're calling this mother constantly, still not implementing behavioral supports and strategies that I recommended that they implement, not doing that, but calling the mother, and she'd be like, I'm on my way. But, if you're traveling by train from, downtown Brooklyn at that, it wasn't even like, close to Queens. She was downtown Brooklyn. It's going to take her at least an hour and a half to get there. On top of that, she has to work. So how many days can I take off because my kid is behavioral and you as a school didn't do your part to support them so we could move them where they needed to be? So guess who's sitting in a room watching the police? And because when they call 911, everybody comes, EMS comes, and the police show up. And I'm seeing police slamming a kid with autism down in the chair because she thinks he's being rude or whatever. I'm like, he has autism, miss. I've actually helped a little girl write a letter to the local precinct because the police were called. There was another bullying situation. Same thing, police were called before the parents were called. 9 years old, 4th grade. All the kids are crying. This one police officer targeted the main kind of ringleader of the situation. And it was this situation where, okay, yeah, the baby was wrong, but she's still a baby. And she's still our baby, right? So at what point do we step in and we still protect her? And I literally had to tell them, you know what, we can hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and close this door since you're going to, right? Because I had to be a little sassy. And, I literally had to sit there and help her write a letter so she could process that emotion, right? Of the fear of having a police officer come talk to her, say something, kind of nasty to her. And she had a previous trauma because she had also witnessed police violence in her family. So that also triggered something in her. So we actually had to sit there and write a letter that I had to fax anonymously to the precinct, but to allow this baby an opportunity to process her feelings in a situation of trauma. And the school did not step in to protect her, right? So talking about, again, allowing these kids to be kids, right? These are babies, and we're getting these things involved, and we're normalizing it too, right? Because you're normalizing them seeing police show up when there's a conflict. You're normalizing seeing an ambulance show up and your parent is in trauma because, they got to pay for that too. When you call the ambulance, they have to pay out of pocket for that ride to the hospital. You know what I mean? So the dealing with the trauma and offering those supports, again, in a system that is not set up for our kids' success. So I want to hear from Quincy, last point from Quincy, and then I want Denise to talk about her B boxes and what we can do to start early. All right. So Q, what you got?
Oh man, that was a lot. I got so many points I want to speak on, but I'm gonna keep it short. Shout out to the doctors in the room. Love it. I love the education here, man. It's dope. There's 2 things I'm gonna just name: representation and labels. Right. We spoke on, we are the representation for our students to understand that you can come from these situations and still be successful. Mm-hmm. And there's so much work we have to put into that for them to believe it. Mm-hmm. Right? No matter what whether you coming from Section A, you come from projects, you come from all kind of different, we all experience this different backgrounds our students come from. And letting them know that, you can still use this to go on and do whatever you want to do. So representation is key. Being able to, Freddie, you said this, being able to sit down with our students and build those relationships. Relationship building is so important because a lot of these students are not used to consistency when it comes to who they have in their life. People come and they leave, come and leave. For them to have, I still myself, it makes me feel older. I won't say older, because I have students that's literally in college now that come back and say, Mr. Merrill, yo, this, that. I'm just like, you in college? Like, how old am I again? You know, because I'm like looking at these kids, because I started with middle school. I didn't do elementary school. I did middle school, high school. I did 1 year being a college professor. And it's like, I'm looking at these students, I'm like, man, like just being able to build those relationships that students can say, I can come back to this person because I have a relationship with them, and I can share with them everything within education and my personal life. You know, so building those relationships is key. And I feel like it's so important to their development to know that they have a solid foundation to come back to, because many of us don't have anything to come back to once we go. You got to have something to come back to keep you grounded, and then that's how they're easily influenced when they go, because they have nothing to come back to. That's where the humility come from. That's where them being humble come from. You know, so that's a big portion of that. And the other part is labels. As we said, when students come to the school, they're so used to seeing police and, you know, being discriminated against. And I feel like that's the part where the system is manipulated as well. Because like Dr. Barnes said earlier, I've been a victim of search, stop, and frisk. I've been discriminated against heading to high school. You know, you see that unmarked car and it makes that U-turn, you already know what's about to happen. It's like, here we go again. And it got to the point where our high school had to give us IDs so that we have something to show them. You know, and it became annoying. So that part of identity and discrimination and labels, it just goes to show that we have to make our kids, us as Black educators, men and women, we have to make our kids comfortable with being who they are, because of there's so much discrimination and the systematic oppression that they face and that they're going to face as they get older, as they leave the state of New York, as they go into different schools, whether it's a PWI or HBCU or a community college or what have you. We have to get them to say, listen, it's okay to be who you are. This is what you're going to encounter, and this is how you should handle it. Because now our role changes from an educator to a counselor, like Mr. Fernandez said. Now it goes from counselor to a parent, from parent to big brother, because we have to talk to them on so many different levels for them to say, you told me to be proud of my skin, but this is what I'm facing. So now we have to teeter the line like, okay, I want you to be proud of who you are. These are the challenges, but you're still great. We have to face this. I remember Mr. Walter told me, I'm 6'3" in high school, and they're like, yo, man, you got a strong voice, you're gonna be powerful, but listen, you're gonna have a lot of challenges. I'm like, what? But I didn't understand what he was saying until I got older. And I'm just like, wow, like, as much as, you know, I seek attention in a positive way, I also seek attention in a negative way when it comes to societal norms. When I'm in the building, I'm a 16-year-old or 15-year-old Quincy. But when I leave the building, that's a Black male adult to society. I'm a threat to society. We have to teach our kids to teeter the line, understand when you encounter people, you have to carry yourself a certain type of way to get what you need to get done. So character building is another spectrum in which we have to put emphasis to. Because I think Freddie, you said this, I've been to funerals for kids. I've heard about and it's like, how do we balance this out? But it's really, we just have to educate them in so many different ways that we're giving them the tools to be successful once they walk out of these doors, whether it's the doors of their own home or the doors of these schools or these doors of this whole state when they go off to go on to college to do great things. So I feel like we come together and we give them identity. We give them identity. We give them that strength. We give them that boundary, that background, that humbleness. And we have to give them that education to say, once you step in front of certain people, this is how you have to handle it and still be proud of yourself, be able to present yourself in a certain type of way.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So, Denise, here's my question to you. Again, we're talking about support. We're talking about seeking support. We're talking about generational trauma, right? So generational trauma is something that you're essentially born into. So before you even get to school, before you get to preschool, there are so many norms and cultures and traditions that have been passed down and born out of trauma. And I will say that I think our generation is probably the first that has actively sought, right, to break so many trauma cycles. And so much of that has to do with how we communicate, how we deal with behavior and discipline, how we deal with, even expectations, right? So again, I heard Fred say, and I heard Dr. Garner say, on the one hand, males don't want to talk to females about things that males go through, but then males have experiences of being traumatized by a male parent figure, right? So whether it was your father wasn't there, or your father, did certain things that caused your mother to have to work overtime, right? So if I can't talk to a female and I don't trust a male to talk to, who do I have? Right. And so then by the time I get to school, I don't know how to reach out for help. I don't know how to actively say, I'm really struggling with this. I'm confused about this. And then everybody kind of touched on the same thing. It all kind of intersects. But then there are these expectations. I'm supposed to make something of myself. I'm supposed to hustle. I'm supposed to have something to show for it. It was touched on in some of our previous discussions. There's a lot of stigma about men going to college past a certain age because they're supposed to have something to show for being an adult. So a woman living at home at 28 years old because she's working on her degree and it's helping her, save money to focus on school, that's acceptable. But a man being 28 years old and still living at home, that's a little suspect. And it doesn't matter that there's a purpose behind that, right? These are the perceptions. These are kind of the messages that we've internalized, right? And I think so much of that, again, starts from such a young age, not really kind of teaching our boys in particular that you can ask for help. You can be vulnerable. You can be, I don't want to say soft in the way that we say soft, but you are a person made of flesh, right? So there has to be a softness to you. And we have to create a space where you're allowed to be softer and vulnerable so that you can build up those muscles that you need to get the help that you need. Because again, I think what I've observed with women versus men, and I have a lot of males in my family. I have a lot of uncles and male cousins, and most of them have gone to college and are educated. And we've had these conversations around what are the expectations, right? And what are the supports and communication cycles that we don't have. And a lot of what they don't have is the opportunity to say, I'm lost. I don't know what to do. And I'm struggling, and not have somebody telling you, like Quincy said earlier, well, you just got to figure it out. Right. And these are cycles that we're learning how to break right now. So Denise and her husband started this company called Kids Be Boxes, and it's focused on social emotional learning. And on top of that, she's raising a young king of her own. So I really want you to kind of touch on that. What really inspires you to do that? What your goal is with this Kids Be Boxes, and what are some of the goals you have for your son to even kind of break those cycles and establish the cycles that we want to see?
Yes, thank you so much for just including what we've got going on in this conversation. Yes, the generational trauma being passed down is so important to come against, if you will. So much so that when my husband David and I decided that yes, we're doing this, we're going to be parents, we had a moment of freak out where we're just like, do we really want to bring him into this world, this chaos? But what it really was doing was waking us up to the reality that we get to build a strong foundation for him. We're both educators. My husband is a middle school math teacher, and he's encountered so many children with similar issues, and just doing the work to getting them on the straight and narrow. And his background, I'm just adding this for context. His background is psychology. So he teaches math, but he has that psychology background. So I remember at his previous schools, he really was like an advocate of like sitting down and leveling with the child and talking to the child and taking it slow. Now, if you saw him, he is 6'5". He stands like a wonderful, strong Black tree in a beautiful garden. And he's just a huge tower of greatness. But when you talk to him, it feels like you're in a therapy session. And I think that, that really pulled on my heartstrings. But how do we now get this to families across the nation? How do we convince strong, powerful Black men to be willing to get down on their knees and level with their child and have a conversation? And so we started to mull over, we started to think about what we're going to do as parents. We're going to try our best not to be parents who are aggressive and bringing our frustrations of the day and of this world onto our child, projecting our issues. We're going to go to therapy. We're going to do the inner work, the self-healing that is necessary so that we have freedom and space to allow him the opportunity to grow up in a healthy home. That's heavy. That's a lot. But we said we're going to put ourselves in this space to do that. And being the educators that we are, we said we're going to make sure that we make learning fun and positive, because statistics, him being a math teacher, he sees a lot of children cut off math. When you ask them, like, when did you start to hate math? They'll tell you right away, oh yeah, when I was in the 3rd grade, I just hated that. Or like, man, when it got to that multiplication, I was out. I was good when it came to addition and subtraction, kindergarten, right? 1st grade. But as time goes on, they started to dwindle with their love for education. And so we said, how do we bridge the gap between education and fun and making families aware of the work that it takes to build up their child? And so that's where we came up with Kids Be Boxes, where we're really quite literally motivating kids to be kids, to be everything that they want to be, whether it's being healthy, being smart, being brave, being great. And so we have a card deck that have alphabet images of Black excellence. So that's a foundational message that is saying, like, be happy. You're going to use the card deck and you're going to see images of A is for Afro, B is for brother, C is for culture, D is for dad. And you're going to see an image of a dad smiling with his son and lifting him up. It's a very, not everybody sees images of that. And so we thought with our card deck, you can see that. And then in that same card deck, we don't just give you flashcards with alphabets and say, yeah, A is for Afro. But no, we give conversation starters and we use the cards. So when you see that image of a dad smiling, maybe that surfaces a feeling that's not so great. And so we have conversations. When I see this image, it makes me feel. And that way, sometimes as Black families, I know it happened in my family. My mother is the most humble person you will ever meet. And she's literally told us, sometimes we're like, I don't want to hear that. And she'll say, like, I didn't really know how to talk to you when you was in middle school. And right, as painful as it was, when I was in middle school, I was like, had my little attitude with her. But she was humble enough to say, I didn't know, I didn't have the language. So we're giving language to parents with our conversation starters. And then, so after you have the conversation, emotions surface, right? There's all types. So we have alongside of that, some emotion coaching that gives parents language, that gives you information on what you're dealing with. And of course, we throw some toys in there so the kid has some fun with it, some stress relievers, and we're partnering with a lot of other Black and Brown creatives as well. So we have products that other Black families have created that go in our boxes. But I think for us, the most important thing is that we get information in the hands and in the homes of families, because we do, whatever your family composition is, whoever is raising that child has an opportunity and quite literally has a mandate, almost a burden, to ensure that they have foundations, have building blocks to really truly develop them, so that before they get to those school doors, they already know that the prisoner pipeline is not for me. Why? Because I'm going to be great. And I'm going to go into that school building. I'm going to be brave. And so we also have affirmation cards as well that really just gives the kids the language to speak into their own lives, to challenge them to know that when I'm going out in this world, I already know. You can't tell me, you out of touch person that does not look like me. You can't tell me what you think my life is going to be like, because I was at home and mommy already told me that I'm going to be great. I have a whole affirmation that I say in the mirror every morning. I know. And so, that's what we aim to do with our boxes. And like I said, we're partnering with so many different spaces so that we can bring those conversations to families, so we can bring those resources to families. And then for what I want for my son, I want him to grow up in a world where he feels like he is not just noticed, but like is understood. I'm not necessarily saying in a sense that it's something that the world has to do or give him, but he knows how to communicate in a way that, you're going to know what Azai Noel is saying and thinking. And he's doing that now. His little self, he speaks and demands a certain level of energy, and it's just quite literally, it's something that we're aware of and we literally tap into. So when he's like yelling and doing a lot, I'm like, and what are you saying? And what are you and what is that? And going through the different emotions. When he's frustrated, I say, are you frustrated? And his little self, he don't know how to really say it, but he'll say, frustrated. Like, he'll talk. Giving him language now early, it's never too early to build those foundational blocks. And, those are just things that I want him to walk around knowing. And I'm going back to this because I really do believe in people power, exposing him to Black excellence. He's going to know that Dr. Barnes is Dr. Barnes, and that was her trajectory, right? He's going to know. He's going to be, when it's show and tell, he's going to be thinking of what Black products can I bring to school and show that this is excellent. Those are things that, we as parents have to do. The world isn't going to do it for us. The world is going to send us so many different messages, try to confuse our kids, try to get them to doubt themselves. Microaggressions are real, and they don't happen only in the workplace. They happen in the schoolhouse. They happen on the playground. And not just, peer-to-peer microaggressions. There are top-down microaggressions that children are facing and don't have the language for yet. And so that's really where we're at. We're really trying to educate ourselves so that we can educate him, so that we can educate others. And if anybody is curious about any of our products, they can either visit our website at buybboxes.com or visit us on Instagram or Facebook at kidsbboxes.
Awesome. I have a 5-year-old. I'll already put it in the chat. Like, I need that. I have a 5-year-old, my daughter, and I love all of that you were talking about. So I'm in. I'm definitely going to support this Black business, and I think it's. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you have different age groups, right, Denise?
Yes, we've newborns, really, because it begins before they even get here. When you think about some of the most successful people in the colleges that they went to. I've had the opportunity to break bread with the likes of Harvard. And when I asked them about what happened, how were you raised, and before they were here, their parents laid a foundation. They knew what schools they were going to go to, what affiliations they were going to have. And so, you know, before they're born, 0 to 12 years old, I believe before they get on into their teen years, there's a certain foundation that needs to be laid in terms of who they see themselves as, so that they can go into the world and be everything that they can be.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you have the newborn, and then you have.
Oh, so newborn, 0 to the first year of life, and then the toddlers. We have a toddler B-box where we really just put some of those foundational things in there, and then we have the elementary school level, and then the preteen level.
Okay. So yeah, we'll definitely make sure that information is put out, but buybboxes.com, and they're on Instagram at kidsbboxes. We are so over time because this conversation got so good, but I do want to give everybody an opportunity to just kind of have their final thoughts, anything that just you really want to push. Again, your programs, your missions, your passions. I'm going to start. My passion is actually empowering families. That's partly why I was so into the B-boxes, because my second job, I have 2 jobs. I work by day as a New York City school psychologist, but I also work for a private practice where I actually have clients, and most of my clients are children and or their parents. So I actually do a lot of parent coaching, and obviously they send their kids to school. So I get to use my knowledge from working in schools to empower parents to advocate for their kids, to teach kids to advocate for themselves. And that is one thing that I've, again, kind of taken upon myself. I know the system isn't going to work for my kids. So now I can work outside of the system, you know, and teach them to demand, you know, what they need, you know, to advocate for themselves, advocate for their kids. So that's my purpose and passion that I am pursuing at this point, educating and teaching people, you know, to advocate and speak truth to power. I'm going to let Freddie, what are your last thoughts? Like, 30 seconds or less, and we'll keep it moving.
This is what I'll say, right? For families, experience. You gotta get these kids out from just the neighborhoods. Please take them out. Go show them the museums. Take them from just seeing the neighborhood. One of the biggest things that a lot of our Black and brown kids do not see is exposure. They don't get that. And for those who are outside the state of New York City, demand these cops from being in the building. We do not need cops in the building. We could get regular security. Do not need an armed person because they do not have a connection to the children that they serve.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Garner, what you got?
In short, I want to, build on what I said before. I think for those who are listening, to this conversation, Black educators, Black philanthropists, Black community leaders, don't be afraid to start the conversations of, building infrastructure and spaces that will educate, our Black young minds. And it doesn't have to start right away as a school, but it can start, as an incubator in an after school, extended day learning space and graduate, right, to something more formal. But any infrastructure that can exclusively, intentionally, build the esteem and the morale, as Sister Denise is doing with Bobby Boxes, let's rally around, put our heads together, and draw upon all of the knowledge that we've learned in our colleges, whether it's PWIs, predominantly white university, white institutions, or our HBCUs, and let's come together and be one or two or three or thousands of different outlets that we can have in lieu of what our Black and brown kids are normally experiencing in our nation's classrooms across the country.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes, again for this time, and colleagues.
Thank you. Quincy, any last words?
I just want to continue to push in our education system identity, pushing the Black identity, knowing who we are, not just present, but in the past, and community building, community organizing, because that's where our strength is. Our strength is in numbers. Our strength is in our support, supporting Black businesses, supporting our youth, supporting our elderly, supporting our existing adults that's in the workforce now. Support goes a long way, and we just have to just hone in and understand and appreciate the Black dollar. Let's rebuild Black Wall Street. Let's rebuild, our communities, and let's not make gentrification be the alteration of what we had, and let it what once was, but let it keep going. We let that continue to alter what we had, and you go back to your old neighborhood and it's not that anymore. Why not? I feel like we need to support Black businesses, whether it's a T-shirt, whether it's it's a juice bar, whether it's a card deck from Ms. Denise over here. Like, let's support every single thing. Let's keep the Black dollar in our community for a whole year and see the progress that we can make as a community. Not just 6 hours, not just 24 hours, but continue to keep it in our community and watch how far we can get, because we are our support. We can't expect the government to make our lives better. We have to make our lives better. We have to make the plans and the foundations for our generations to come. Our kids and our kids' kids, we have to do that now by supporting one another. And I definitely do want to say thank you, Dr. Barnes, my classmate, my colleague, my sister, for having this, because this is more than important. And I can't wait to share it. I've actually shared it already on Instagram. So yeah, shout out to you, man.
All right, Denise, last words.
Don't forget about the kids in all of this. Don't be afraid to ask them, talk to them, engage with them, and make sure, I'm just going to say this, we've been dealing with a lot. Make sure you take care of your mental health so that you can take care of our babies.
Yes. Thank you all so much. I mean, my heart is so full. I'm always so happy when I get to do these things because, like I said, everybody here is just a dynamic person. I was telling everybody, I think in order of timeline, I've known Freddie the longest. Freddie and I went to Philippa Schuyler together from the 6th grade, rode the B-52 bus from Bed-Stuy to Bushwick every morning. And sometimes we walked to school because the bus was taking too long. But it's been awesome to see. And Quincy had more hair than I have, y'all. Like, Quincy's hair was like out here, and he had the baby hairs, y'all. I'm telling all his business. He had the baby hairs that he would brush down. But it's amazing because I got to grow up with this excellence and see it turned around and put back into our communities. I met Denise and Dr. Garner later in life, but their impact, we have a lot of connections as well. Denise's family and my family have been connected for years, and we didn't even meet till we were probably either almost adults or really, really young adults. And Dr. Garner, we have so many excellent friends in common and people. So your impact is known and it is noticed by me. And so I had to get you guys on here because I just needed all this excellence together. So I really, really appreciate you. Thank you to everybody who's taken the time out to watch. I know this was a long one, but it was a good one. And if you stuck to the end, you will see that it was so worth it. Thank you guys again. Appreciate you. Love you. And just keep doing what you're doing. All right.
Love you.
Have a good one. Bye.